Catherine Voss stood at the observation deck of the warship, eternal vigil, and watched the stars spin slowly past the reinforced glass, his crystalline skin catching the light and throwing small rainbows across the metal walls. Behind him, he had served the Presoned Solari Dominion for 50 years, and in that time he had seen things that would break most beings. He had fought the acid-spitting Krell on the burning plains of Mordith Prime. He had held the line against the endless swarms of the Sithari hive mind. And he had watched friends dissolve into nothing when the Void Reapers came hunting in the dark. Spaces between stars fear was something he had mastered long ago. Or so he believed. The summons had come 3 days earlier, and now he found himself aboard a coalition flagship preparing for a war that would decide the fate of the Outer Rim. The hegemony of Cause had begun its expansion, and everywhere they went they left only ashes and silence behind them. But that was not what troubled Catherine as he stood watching the void. What troubled him was the news that humans would be joining the fight. He had heard stories about them, of course. Everyone in the galaxy had heard something about the strange soft creatures from the small blue world called Earth. They had only made contact with the greater galactic community 40 years ago, and in that short time they had spread to dozens of colonies with a speed that made older species nervous. They were curious creatures by all accounts, always asking questions and poking at things they did not understand. But they were also fragile and weak and short-lived. A human might live 80 or 90 cycles if they were lucky, while Catherine himself had already seen 200 and expected to see 200 more. What could such beings possibly offer in a war against a hegemony? The door behind him slid open with a soft hiss, and Admiral Torek entered the observation deck. The old Coalition commander was a Vethkai, his gray skin wrinkled with age and his 4 eyes dim but still sharp with intelligence. "Commander Voss," the Admiral said in greeting, "I trust you have reviewed your new assignment?" Catherine turned and gave a respectful nod, but his expression made his feelings clear. "I have reviewed it, Admiral, and I must respectfully request a change. You have assigned human soldiers to my battalion, and I do not believe they will survive what is coming." Torek's thin mouth curved into something that might have been a smile. "You think them weak?" "I think them unsuited for this kind of warfare. The hegemony shows no mercy and takes no prisoners. They use terror as a weapon, and they break their enemies psychologically before they ever fire a shot. The humans are too new to this, too soft. They will crack under pressure, and when they do, my Solari warriors will have to carry them." The Admiral moved to stand beside Catherine at the observation window, and for a long moment he said nothing at all. "I have lived a very long time, Commander," Torek finally said, "and I have learned that the universe enjoys surprising those who think they understand it. You look at the humans and you see small, fragile creatures with short lives and soft bodies. You see prey. Am I wrong? You are looking at the surface and missing what lies beneath. I met the human delegation when they first made contact with the Coalition, and do you know what struck me most about them?" Catherine waited. "They were afraid," Torek continued. "Afraid of us? Afraid of the vastness of space. Afraid of what they might find in the dark. But they came anyway. They pushed past their fear and reached out into the unknown, because their curiosity was stronger than their terror. Fear is a weakness, Admiral. Is it?" Torek turned his 4 eyes toward Catherine, and there was something ancient and knowing in his gaze. Or is it a tool that some species have learned to use in ways we cannot imagine? Before Catherine could respond, the ship's alarm began to wail and red lights flashed across every surface. Both officers turned as the main view screen activated and showed a tactical display filled with enemy signatures. "The hegemony." Catherine breathed. "They are early. Intelligence said we had 3 more days." "Intelligence was wrong," Torek replied grimly, And now you will meet your human soldiers in battle rather than in a briefing room. Go, Commander. Your battalion awaits. Catharan Rend. Corridors of the Eternal Vigil were chaos as soldiers of a dozen species rushed to their stations. Catharan pushed through them all until he reached the hangar bay where the dropships waited. His Solari warriors were already there, tall and proud with their crystalline skin gleaming under the harsh lights. They were the finest soldiers he had ever commanded, and he knew each of them by name. And standing apart from them in a tight, organized group were the humans. There were perhaps 60 of them, and at their head stood a woman with dark hair pulled back from her face and eyes the color of deep water. She wore the same combat armor as her soldiers and carried herself with a quiet confidence that Catharan had not expected. "Commander Voss," she said as he approached, and her voice was calm and steady. "I am Captain Elena Vasquez of the Terran Marine Corps. My company is ready for deployment." Catharan looked at her and then at the humans behind her. They were checking their weapons and adjusting their gear with practiced efficiency. No panic in their movements, no fear in their eyes. No. He realized with a start that was not quite right. There was fear there. He could see it in the tension of their shoulders and the tightness around their mouths. But they moved anyway. They prepared anyway. They stood ready anyway. "Captain Vasquez," he said slowly, "we are about to drop into a war zone against an enemy that has destroyed entire civilizations. Are your soldiers prepared for what awaits them?" Vasquez met his eyes and something flickered in her gaze. Something hard and bright and almost hungry. "Commander," she said quietly, "my people have been fighting wars since before we could write our names in the dirt. We have faced enemies that outnumbered us 1,000 to 1, and we have walked through fire and blood and horror that would make your worst nightmares look like pleasant dreams." She smiled, and it was not a gentle expression. "We were born for this." The dropship doors opened, and the void of space beckoned. Below them, the colony world of Vera 6 was burning, its cities sending plumes of smoke into the atmosphere that were visible even from orbit. Atharan gave the order, and his battalion moved into the ships. Solari and humans side by side, warriors of crystal and warriors of flesh preparing to descend into hell together as his own ship lifted off. Catharan found himself watching Captain Vasquez. She sat among her soldiers and spoke to them quietly, and whatever she said made them laugh. Actually laugh, as they plummeted toward a battlefield where death waited with open arms. He did not understand these creatures at all, but as the ship shook with atmospheric entry and the heat of re-entry turned the windows red with fire, Catharan felt something he had not felt in decades: uncertainty, and beneath that uncertainty, buried so deep he almost did not recognize it, was the faintest whisper of something that might have been furtive of the enemy below, but of the allies beside him. The colony world of Vera 6 was dying. Catharan could see it in the smoke that choked the sky and the fires that burned in every direction. He could hear it in the distant screams and the constant thunder of explosions. He could smell it in the ash and blood that hung heavy in the air. His battalion had landed in what remained of the capital city's eastern district, and all around them buildings lay in ruins while the bodies of civilians littered the streets like fallen leaves. The hegemony had arrived first, and they had shown no mercy. "Move to cover," Catharan ordered through the communication link. "Form defensive positions and await my command." His Solari warriors responded instantly, their crystalline forms flowing through the rubble with practiced grace. They had done this 100 times before, and they knew their roles perfectly. The humans moved differently. Captain Vasquez had her Marines spread out in small groups of 4 or 5, and they advanced through the destruction with a strange rolling motion that kept them constantly moving, constantly watching. They checked corners and doorways with a paranoid intensity that seemed almost excessive. "Captain," Catherine said as he approached her position, "we should hold here and wait for reinforcements. Pushing forward now would be tactically unsound." Vasquez was crouched behind a collapsed wall, and her eyes were scanning the smoke-filled streets ahead. She held up one hand without looking at him. "Contact," she said quietly into her own communication link. 200 meters north, Hegemony Patrol. "Looks like 20 hostiles with heavy weapons." Catherine moved to look, and yes, he could see them now. The tall, brutal forms of Hegemony soldiers moving through the ruins. They were executing survivors as they went, their weapons flashing bright against the gray sky. "We cannot engage," Catherine said firmly. "We are outnumbered and outgunned. The smart move is to fall back and regroup with the main force. There is a civilian bunker 50 meters behind that patrol," Vasquez replied, and her voice had gone flat and cold. "Our scans show life signs inside. Mostly children based on the bio readings. That is unfortunate, but we cannot risk the battalion for..." "Commander." Vasquez cut him off and turned to look at him with those deep water eyes. "I am not asking for permission." She rose from cover and made a series of hand signals to her Marines. They responded immediately, flowing into new positions with that same rolling advance. And before Catherine could object, they opened fire. The noise was deafening. Human weapons were loud in a way that Solari energy weapons were not. They used chemical propellants and metal projectiles, and they roared like angry beasts when they fired. The sound echoed off the ruined buildings and seemed to shake the very air. The Hegemony Patrol scattered in surprise and then returned fire. Plasma bolts screamed through the air, and one of them struck a human Marine in the shoulder, burning through his armor and into the flesh beneath. Catherine expected the human to fall, to scream, to die instead. The Marine stumbled back against the wall and kept firing with his good arm, while a medic rushed to his side. The wounded human was laughing, actually laughing, and shouting something to his squad mates that Catherine could not understand. "That is Private Morrison," Vasquez said as she fired controlled bursts into the enemy position. "He's making a joke about how his mother warned him not to join the Marines. His sense of humor is terrible, but his aim is excellent." Catherine watched in stunned silence as the humans pushed forward through the enemy fire. They did not hesitate, did not falter, did not break. They moved like water flowing around stones, always advancing, always killing within minutes. The Hegemony Patrol was dead, and the humans were already moving toward the civilian bunker. Catherine followed because he did not know what else to do. The bunker door had been sealed from the inside, and Vasquez had one of her engineers work on opening it while the rest of her Marines formed a defensive perimeter. When the door finally groaned open and swung inward, Catherine saw dozens of faces staring out from the darkness. Children mostly, as Vasquez had said, their large eyes wet with tears and their small bodies shaking with terror. But there were adults too, elderly and wounded colonists who had taken shelter when the attack began. A human sergeant named Okonkwo was the first one inside, and his massive form should have terrified the children. But instead he knelt down and pulled something from his pocket. A small, colorful package that he tore open to reveal some kind of food. "Hey, little ones," he said in a voice so gentle it made Catherine's teeth tighten. "You hungry? I've got chocolate, and I am pretty sure it is the good stuff." The children hesitated, and then one of them, a tiny girl with dust in her hair, reached out with trembling hands and took the offered treat. Within moments, the other Marines were doing the same thing, handing out food and water from their own supplies, wrapping blankets around shivering shoulders, speaking soft words of comfort to those who were crying. These were the same creatures who had just killed 20 enemy soldiers without hesitation. Theron did not understand later. That night, as the battalion made camp in a defensible position, he found himself sitting near the human section of the perimeter. The Marines were quiet now. their earlier energy replaced by a somber stillness as they cleaned their weapons and ate their rations. He noticed one of them, a young woman with short red hair, sitting apart from the others. She was staring at nothing, and tears were running silently down her cheeks. Kethran watched as another Marine approached her and sat down without speaking. He simply placed a hand on her shoulder and stayed there, a silent presence in her grief. After a few minutes, the crying woman wiped her eyes and nodded once, and the other Marine nodded back. Then she stood up, checked her rifle, and walked to her watch position as if nothing had happened. "We lost 3 today." Vasquez's voice came from behind Ketharan, and he turned to find her standing in the shadows. Private Chun, Corporal Williams, and Sergeant Reyes. "They were good people. I am sorry," Ketharan said, and meant it. "Do not be sorry," Vasquez replied, and her voice was tired but steady. "They knew what they signed up for, and they died protecting those children. There is no better death for a Marine." She sat down beside him, and for a moment they were silent together. "How do you do it?" Ketharan finally asked. "How do your people continue to fight when they feel so much? The pain, the grief, the fear. I can see it in all of you. You are not numb to it, like some species become. You feel everything, and yet you keep going." Vasquez considered the question for a long moment. "Do you know what adrenaline is, Commander?" Ketharan shook his head. "It is a chemical our bodies produce when we are in danger. It makes us faster and stronger. It dulls our pain and sharpens our focus. Our ancestors used it to fight predators and survive in a hostile world, and we have learned to use it in war." She looked at him and smiled a strange, sad smile. "We are afraid all the time, Commander. We are afraid of dying and afraid of losing the people we love. We are afraid of failure and pain and the dark. But somewhere along the way we learned that fear does not have to stop us. It can push us forward instead." She stood and stretched, her joints popping in the cold night air. "Get some rest, Commander. Tomorrow we push deeper into the city, and I have a feeling the enemy is going to try to break us." She walked away and left Ketharan alone with his thoughts. Sat there for a long time, watching the humans as they moved through their camp. They laughed quietly with each other. They shared stories and food. They mourned their dead and prepared for the battles to come, and Ketharan began to understand that he had made a terrible mistake in judging these creatures. They were not weak at all. They were something else entirely. Something he did not yet have words for, but he was beginning to learn. 3 weeks into the campaign, and the war had become a nightmare. The hegemony had brought all their cruelty to bear against the coalition forces, and every day brought fresh horrors. They broadcast the executions of captured soldiers on open channels. They sent pieces of the dead back to coalition lines, wrapped in mocking messages. They used psychological warfare like a surgeon uses a knife, cutting precisely where it would hurt. Moskatharan had seen many wars, but he had never seen anything like this. The coalition was breaking. The Solari were holding together through discipline and pride, but other species in the alliance were crumbling. A regiment of Vethkai had refused to advance after their commanding officer was captured and tortured on a live broadcast. A battalion of Kreth warriors had scattered into the wilderness rather than face another assault, and rumors were spreading that the coalition leadership was considering a full retreat. Morale was a fragile thing, and the hegemony knew exactly how to shatter it, but the humans were not breaking. If anything, they seemed to grow harder with each passing day. Their eyes colder, their movements more precise, their silence heavier. They stopped joking as much, and they stopped smiling. But they also stopped hesitating, and they stopped showing mercy to enemy soldiers who surrendered. "They are changing," Ketharan said to Vasquez one evening as they reviewed tactical maps in the command tent. "Your people are becoming something different than they were when we landed." Vasquez looked up from the holographic display, and her face was drawn with exhaustion. "We are becoming what we need to be," she said simply. "What does that mean?" She was quiet for a moment, and then she pushed away from the table and walked to the tent's entrance. Outside, the sky was red with distant fires, and the sound of artillery echoed across the highlands where they had established their forward operating base. Humans have a concept that most species do not seem to share, she said without looking at him. "We call it spite." "Spite?" Catherine repeated the unfamiliar word. "It is hard to explain. Imagine that you have lost everything: your hope, your safety, the people you love. Imagine that the universe has taken from you until there is nothing left to take. What do you do then?" Catherine considered the question seriously. "I suppose you give up," he said slowly, "or you accept your fate and die with honor." "Most species would," Vasquez agreed, "but humans do not work that way. When we have lost everything, when hope is gone and there is no reason left to fight, something else takes over. We stop fighting to win, and we start fighting to make sure our enemies lose." She turned to face him, and her eyes were hard as stone. "We call it spite. It is the stubborn, vicious refusal to let the ones who hurt us have a moment of peace. It is the fire that burns when all other fires have gone out. It is probably the most dangerous thing about our species," as if to prove her point. An explosion shook the camp, and Catherine rushed outside to see what had happened. A hegemony strike team had infiltrated their perimeter and was attempting to destroy their supply depot. Coalition soldiers were scrambling in all directions, many of them panicking at the sudden attack, but the humans were not panicking. A squad of Marines had already engaged the enemy, and they fought with a cold ferocity that made Catherine's blood run chill. There was no fear in them, no hesitation, only a terrible focused rage that cut through the hegemony soldiers like a blade through silk. One human, a demolitions expert named Torres, took a fatal wound in the first seconds of the fight. A plasma bolt had torn through his chest, and everyone could see that he would not survive, but Torres did not fall. Instead, he grabbed an enemy soldier and dragged the struggling hegemony fighter with him as he stumbled toward the enemy's position. The other Marines provided cover fire, clearing his path, and Torres kept moving. Even as blood poured from his wound and his legs began to fail, he was smelling. Catherine watched in horror and awe as Torres reached the hegemony command post and triggered every explosive charge on his body. The resulting detonation killed a dozen enemy soldiers and destroyed their communications equipment, ending the assault as effectively as a single devastating blow. The surviving hegemony forces fled into the night, and the Marines did not pursue. They simply collected their dead and went back to their positions as if nothing had happened. "That," Vasquez said quietly from beside Catherine, "is spite." Torres knew he was dying, and he decided that if he was going to die, then he was going to take as many of them with him as possible. It is not rational, and it is not strategic. It is something deeper than that. Catherine stared at the burning wreckage and felt something cold settle in his chest. "Your people frighten me, Captain," he admitted. "Good," Vasquez replied. "We should frighten you. We frighten ourselves sometimes." The next day, Coalition intelligence reported something unprecedented. The hegemony had begun requesting reinforcements for this sector, something they had never done in any previous campaign. Their communications were becoming erratic, their advances more cautious, and their psychological warfare was losing its effectiveness. The reason became clear when intercepted transmissions were decoded. The IDAN hegemony commanders were talking about the humans. They called them the ones who do not stop, and there was fear in their words. Real, genuine fear from soldiers who had conquered 100 worlds. They did not understand how to fight an enemy that did not break, that did not flee, that responded to terror with something even worse than terror. "We have gotten their attention," Sergeant Okonkwo said with grim satisfaction as he read the intelligence reports. They finally understand that we are not like the others. What happens now? Catherine asked. Now they send their best, Vasquez replied, and her voice was steady. The Dread Legion? They have never been defeated, and they exist specifically to break enemies who will not break otherwise. Are you afraid? Vasquez smiled, and it was the most unsettling expression Catherine had ever seen on a human face. I am terrified, she said. And that is exactly how I like it. The other Marines heard this, and several of them laughed. It was not the laughter of joy or amusement. It was something darker, something hungry. The laughter of predators who had scented Prakoth Aran remembered Admiral Torik's words from what felt like a lifetime ago. You do not yet understand what you have been given. He was beginning to understand. Now the humans were not the weak link in his battalion. They were not a liability to be protected or a burden to be carried. They were a weapon, and someone had just pointed them at the hegemony's finest soldiers for the first time since the war began. Catherine found himself feeling something he had not expected: pity, but not for the humans, for the Dread Legion who were coming to destroy them, who had never faced anything like human spite, who had no idea what was waiting for them in the ruins of Vera 6. They were about to learn what happened when you pushed humans. Farkatharin almost wished he could warn them. The Dread Legion arrived on a morning painted red by dust storms. Catherine stood at the defensive line they had established at Ashfall Ridge and watched the enemy approach through his tactical display. There were thousands of them, the elite executioners of the hegemony, warriors who had broken entire civilizations and left nothing but silence in their wake. They were massive creatures, each standing over 7 feet tall, with bodies enhanced by technology and biology until they were more machine than flesh. Their armor was black as the void between stars and decorated with the bones and symbols of the species they had destroyed, but worse than their size or their weapons was what they did to the mind. The Dread Legion used psychic amplifiers that BROADCST terror like a signal. Catherine could feel it washing over him even at this distance. A cold, creeping dread that whispered that resistance was futile, that death was coming, that there was nothing to do but run or surrender, or simply give up and accept the end. All around him, coalition soldiers were faltering. The Vethkai were trembling, and their formation was starting to come apart. The Kreth warriors had already begun retreating toward the rear lines. Even Catherine's own Solari, proud and disciplined as they were, showed cracks in their resolve as the psychic pressure grew stronger. He looked to the human positions expecting to see the same fear, the same wavering will. They were playing cards, a group of Marines, sat in a circle behind their defensive barriers and dealt hands of some game Catherine did not recognize. They laughed and cursed and accused each other of cheating while the most terrifying army in the galaxy marched toward them. Sergeant Okonkwo won a hand and grinned as he collected his winnings. Finally, he said loud enough for Catherine to hear, "Something worth killing. I was getting bored fighting their second-string troops. Their reputation is impressive." Another Marine replied casually, "I wonder if they bleed different than the regular hegemony soldiers." "Only one way to find out," a third added, and the whole group laughed as if they were discussing sports rather than approaching. Army of Nightmares Captain Vasquez walked the line, checking on each position and speaking quietly with her people. She stopped when she reached Catherine and looked out at the approaching enemy with an expression of calm assessment. "The Dread Legion," she said thoughtfully. "I have read about them. They use fear as their primary weapon. They break enemy morale before the fighting even begins. Can you not feel it?" Catherine asked, and his voice was strained. "The terror they broadcast. It is like ice in my veins. I feel it," Vasquez confirmed. "But feeling fear and being controlled by fear are different things. My people have spent our entire existence learning to function while terrified. We are very good at it by now. The Dread Legion stopped their advance and began their ritual. They executed prisoners in full view of the coalition lines. They displayed trophies from their previous conquests. They roared challenges and promises of suffering that echoed across the valley. It was designed to break the defenders before the first shot was fired. The coalition lines trembled. More soldiers fled. Officers screamed orders that nobody followed. The humans began to sing. Catharan did not recognize the song, but it spread through their ranks like fire. Deep voices rising together in a melody that was somehow both mournful and defiant. A sound that pushed back against the psychic terror like a physical force. When the song ended, the humans began to advance. Catharan's mind went blank with shock. The Dread Legion was still performing their intimidation ritual. They had not yet begun their assault, and the humans were walking toward them as if they were going for a morning stroll. "What are you doing?" he shouted at Vasquez. "Ending this," she called back without turning around. "We do not wait for monsters to come to us, Commander. We go and meet them." The Marines moved in perfect formation, their weapons raised, their faces calm. They did not run, did not scream battle cries, did not waste energy on display. They simply walked forward with the steady, patient certainty of a natural disaster. The Dread Legion's ritual faltered as they realized what was happening. For the first time in recorded history, their fear tactics were not working. Their enemy was not breaking. Their psychological warfare had failed, and then the humans opened fire. The battle that followed was unlike anything Catharan had ever witnessed. The Dread Legion charged to meet the human advance, and the two forces collided in a storm of violence that defied description. Plasma fire and bullets filled the air. Bodies fell on both sides, and the ground turned to mud mixed with blood and ash. But the humans did not stop. They fought like machines, like forces of nature, like something that could not be broken because it had already been forged in the breaking. When one fell, another stepped forward to take their place. When they were wounded, they kept fighting. When they died facing the enemy. Catharan saw Vasquez lead a charge directly into a Dread Legion formation. She was small against their massive forms, fragile compared to their augmented bodies. But she moved with a speed and ferocity that left them struggling to keep up. She killed the first one with a blade to the throat, the second with point-blank fire to the face, and the third she simply tore apart with her bare hands when her weapons failed. Blood covered her armor and her face, and still she fought. Still she pushed forward. Still she refused to fall. A Dread Legion champion struck her from behind with a blow that should have killed her. She went down hard, and Catharan was certain she was dead. But she rose again. Blood poured from wounds that would have ended any other soldier, and she rose again, her eyes blazing with something that was not quite sanity. Her lips pulled back in a smile that showed teeth. She killed the champion who had struck her and kept going. All across the battlefield, the same story played out. Humans who should have fallen kept fighting. Humans who were wounded refused to die. Humans who had every reason to flee instead charged deeper into the enemy ranks, and the Dread Legion broke. It happened slowly at first. Small groups falling back, individual soldiers hesitating where they had never hesitated before. But then it became a flood, a retreat, a rout. The executioners of the hegemony, the breakers of civilizations, the army that had never known defeat, ran from the field with the humans pursuing them like wolves chasing wounded prey. Catharan found himself standing frozen as the battle moved past him. Unable to process what he was seeing, a dying hegemony officer lay nearby. One of the Dread Legion elite with his psychic amplifiers shattered and his body torn by human weapons. Catharan approached him and knelt down. "What happened?" he asked. "You were supposed to be unbeatable. You were supposed to break them. What went wrong?" The dying soldier looked at him with eyes full of something Catharan had never seen in a hegemony warrior before: fear. "We tried to make them afraid. The soldier gasped. We showed them our power and our cruelty, and we waited for them to break like all the others. But they did not break. They did not flee. They ran toward the thing that frightened them. He coughed blood, and his voice became a whisper. What kind of species does that? What kind of madness drives them to embrace terror instead of running from it? They are not soldiers. They are not warriors. They are something else. What are they? Catharan asked, but the soldier was dead, and the answer died with him. Catharan stood and looked across the battlefield at the humans who were regrouping for pursuit. They were battered and bloodied, many of them barely able to stand, but they were preparing to chase the fleeing enemy. Vasquez limped toward him, and her injuries were severe enough that she should have been unconscious. Instead, she was giving orders and coordinating the next phase of the attack. Commander, she said when she reached him, are your Solari ready to move? We cannot let them regroup. Catharan looked at her. This small, soft creature who had just done the impossible, and felt something shift permanently in his understanding of the universe. Yes, Captain, he said quietly. We are ready to follow you. She nodded and turned away, and Catharan realized that he had spoken the truth in a way he had not intended. He was not just ready to follow her orders, he was ready to follow her. Anywhere, because he had seen what humans could do, and he understood now why the galaxy should be afraid, not because humans were monsters, but because they were something far more dangerous. They were survivors. 1 year had passed since the Battle of Ashfall Ridge. Catharan stood in the ruins of what had once been the hegemony capital and watched the victory ceremony unfold before him. Flags of the coalition flew above shattered towers. Soldiers of a dozen species gathered to mark the end of the war. And somewhere in the distance, music played to celebrate the peace that had finally come. The hegemony was finished. Their empire had crumbled in the months following the Dread Legion's defeat. Species they had conquered rose up in rebellion, their armies fractured and scattered. And in the end, their homeworld fell not to a siege but to a surrender as the last of their leaders accepted that there was no hope left. The humans had led every major offensive of the final campaign. Catharan had watched them liberate world after world, always pushing forward, always refusing to stop until the job was done. He had seen them show unexpected mercy to those who surrendered and terrible fury to those who did not. And he had learned that both responses came from the same place. They cared too much. That was the secret he had discovered over the long months of war. Humans were not fearless, and they were not cruel, and they were not mindless killing machines. They were creatures who felt everything intensely, every joy and every sorrow, every hope and every fear, and that was exactly what made them so dangerous. When a human loved something, they would burn the universe to protect it. When a human hated something, they would not rest until it was destroyed. There was no half measure in them, no calm detachment, no ability to simply accept things as they were. They changed what they could not accept, and they accepted nothing. Captain Vasquez found him standing apart from the celebration, and she looked different than she had when they first met. There were new scars on her face and hands, lines around her eyes that had not been there before, a heaviness in her movements that spoke of wounds both seen and unseen. But she was alive, and that itself was a kind of miracle. Commander, she said as she approached. Or should I say, Colonel? I heard about your promotion. I heard about yours as well, General. Catharan replied with something that might have been a smile. It seems we have both risen in the ranks since Varith 6. War has a way of creating opportunities for advancement. Vasquez agreed, and there was a bitterness in her voice that Catharan understood. They had both lost too many friends to feel joy at their own survival. I have requested permanent assignment as a liaison to human forces, Catharan said after a moment of silence. The Zolari Dominion has approved my transfer, Vasquez looked at him with surprise. You want to stay with us? Even after everything you have seen? Because of everything I have seen, Catharan corrected. I came to this war thinking I understood fear and thinking your species was weak. I have learned that I was wrong about both things. He turned to face her fully. Humans are the most afraid species I have ever encountered. You fear death and pain and loss and failure. You fear the dark and the unknown and the things you cannot control. Fear saturates every part of your existence in ways that other species cannot comprehend. That does not sound like a compliment. Vasquez observed. It is the highest compliment I can give, Catharan replied. Because you have taken that fear and transformed it into something extraordinary. You have learned to use it, to channel it, to make it serve you rather than control you. Your fear has become a forge, and every horror you face sharpens you into something more formidable. He paused and gathered his thoughts. Do you know what the hegemony called you in their final days? They called you the species that runs toward its own nightmares. They could not understand it. They could not fight it. And in the end, they could not survive it. Vasquez was quiet for a long moment. We lost a lot of good people proving that point. She finally said, Yes, Catharan agreed. And that is the other half of the truth I have learned. Your capacity for violence exists precisely because of your capacity for love. Torres did not blow himself up out of hatred for the enemy. He did it to protect the soldiers behind him. Your Marines did not charge the Dread Legion because they wanted to die. They did it because they refused to let their fear cost others their lives. Is that so strange? To most species, yes, Catharan said honestly. We fight for territory and resources and survival. We do not throw ourselves into certain death for the chance to save strangers. We do not endure unimaginable suffering just to protect people we will never meet. He shook his head slowly. Humans do. I have seen it again and again and again over this past year, and I still do not fully understand it. But I know that it is real. A young Solari officer approached them. One of the new recruits who had joined after the tide of war had turned. She was full of questions and curiosity, the kind of enthusiasm that Catharan had once possessed before 50 years of warfare had worn it away. Colonel, she said respectfully, forgive my interruption, but I have been wanting to ask you something. You have spent more time with the humans than anyone else in the Dominion. What are they really like? Catharan looked at Vasquez, and she nodded slightly. Giving him permission to speak for her people, he considered the question carefully because he knew that his answer would shape how his species understood humanity for generations to come. What could he say that would capture the truth of what he had witnessed? He remembered Vasquez bleeding and laughing at Ashfall Ridge. Remembered Torres smiling as he walked toward his own. Death, he remembered Marines playing cards. While the Dread Legion approached, he remembered a sergeant giving chocolate to terrified children in a bombed-out bunker. Remembered all of it, and he tried to find the words, I thought I knew fear. He began slowly. I had faced death 100 times, and I believed myself hardened beyond all terror. I looked at the humans and saw small, soft creatures with short lives, and I pitied them for their weakness. The young officer listened intently. Then I went to war beside them, and I learned that fear is not weakness to them. It is a whetstone, and every horror they witness sharpens them. I learned that their short lives do not make them timid. They make them urgent. They do not waste time on things that do not matter because they know their time is limited. He paused. But the most important thing I learned is this. Do not pity humans for their short lives, and do not pity them for their fears. Pity their enemies instead. Because humans do not merely fight, they remember. And they make absolutely certain that whatever harmed them will never harm anything again. The young officer's eyes were wide. They sound terrifying. They are, Catharan agreed. But watch. He pointed to where a group of human soldiers had gathered at the edge of the ceremony. They had found a cluster of refugee children, survivors of the hegemony's final atrocities, and they were playing with them. Big armored marines were letting tiny children climb on their shoulders. A sniper who had killed hundreds of enemies was making funny faces to earn giggles. Captain Vasquez herself had joined them and was showing a small boy how to make shapes with his hands that cast shadows on the wall. They were laughing. All of them, the soldiers and the children alike. That is the other half of the truth, Catherine said quietly. They are capable of terrible violence because they have so much they want to protect. They become monsters when they must, so that children do not have to. They carry the weight of war so that others can know peace. He watched Vasquez pick up a crying toddler and hold her gently, whispering comfort until the tears stopped. This was the same woman who had torn a Dread Legion champion apart with her bare hands. What does that make them? The young officer asked. Catherine considered the question. Human, he finally said. It makes them human. And I have come to believe that there is nothing more dangerous or more wonderful in all the galaxy. The sun was setting over the ruined city, and its light painted everything in shades of gold and red. Somewhere in the distance, the music was still playing, and the celebration was still going strong, but Catherine stayed where he was and watched the humans play with the children they had saved. He had spent his whole life learning about war and death and fear. These strange, beautiful, terrifying creatures had taught him something else entirely. They had taught him about love, and he thought that perhaps in all his 200 years that was the most important lesson he had ever learned. The war was over, but his time with the humans was just beginning, and for the first time in longer than he could remember. Catherine was looking forward to the future.